A film with an impenetrable story can be a major selling point, especially when it comes to horror. Anything that's beyond human comprehension can be frightening, so it makes sense why the genre often explores the surreal and otherworldly. And since we human beings are curious creatures, we're naturally drawn to the mysterious, the unknown, and the downright nonsensical. Despite the fact that these horror flicks are definitely worth a look, don't expect to understand a single thing about them. And with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 10 amazing horror movies that are total nonsense. Number 10, Mystics in Bali. Mystics in Bali earns its place in cinematic history since it's the first horror film to come out of Indonesia. However, the Southeast Asian flick also deserves recognition since it's one of the most deranged movies ever made. The garbled tale centres around an anthropologist called Kathy, who travels to Bali to study black magic. After encountering a witch, Kathy is transformed into a flying vampire that disconnects her head from her body while her entrails hang from her neck. As she wreaks havoc on the town, the locals band together to stop her. Even though the story is unconventional, to say the least, it's not incomprehensible. At first. Due to the abundance of silliness, it could be easy not to take Mystics in Bali seriously. However, these goofy moments create an effective juxtaposition when things take a dark turn, especially when the creature attempts to feed on newborns. The plot may be indecipherable at times, but it doesn't stop Mystics in Bali from being deeply entertaining. Number 9, House. Even though House is renowned for its ludicrous imagery, it's impossible to prepare for how balls-to-the-wall nuts this horror comedy is. I mean, the fact that it's categorized as experimental really doesn't do it justice. The film begins with a teen called Gorgeous heading on a trip with her friends to see her aunt. Little does Gorgeous know that her aunt died years ago and has been reborn as a vengeful spirit who feeds on the souls of unmarried girls. Although the plot itself should be reasonably straightforward, it's arduous to understand, since the majority of the scenes are chock-a-blocked with the weirdest visuals imaginable. While crucial exposition is being doled out, it's easy to get distracted when the scene cuts to a carnivorous piano, cartoon skeletons, or dismembered legs kicking a blood-vomiting cat painting. Although the dated special effects could hamper the viewing experience, they actually amplify it, since they add another layer of surrealism to this already loopy flick. Number 8, Rubber. In the realm of horror, anything can be turned into a homicidal maniac. As a result, it was only a matter of time before there was a horror flick about a killer wheel. Since the promotions for Rubber emphasize the story revolves around a murderous car tire, it's obvious that this fantasy horror was going to be balmy. And yet, the bonkers tale proves to be significantly stranger than the advertisements implied. In the prologue, a sheriff called Chad addresses a visible audience, informing them that they're about to watch a movie where strange things happen for no reason. At first, these spectators appear to stand in for the viewers. However, Chad interweaves inside and outside the fourth wall throughout, causing the rules of this reality to unravel. When he fails to kill the tyrannical tire, Chad tries to murder the stand-in audience, believing the film can't exist if nobody is alive to watch it. Meta moments like this are so out there, it's hard to comprehend what movie this is supposed to be, but based on Chad's opening monologue, that's sort of the point. Although Rubber's plot would have functioned fine without the film-within-a-film structure, it is a welcome addition, since it makes this already fantastical premise 10 times more perplexing. Number 7, The Happiness of the Katakuris. Throughout his illustrious career, Takashi Miike has made quite a few WTF features, and yet these films' eccentricities feel mundane compared to The Happiness of the Katakuris. This absurdist farce starts off with a woman having her uvula pulled out by an imp she found in her soup. But what makes this already peculiar scene stranger is the fact that it's never mentioned again. Instead, the story primarily focuses on a family struggling to keep their B&B in business. But that's not all. When the Katakuri family discover that their first tenant has wound up dead, the film decides this is the most appropriate time to turn into a full-blown musical. Due to these spontaneous changes in genre, style, and tone, it's obvious that the director isn't abiding by any cinematic conventions or rules. Sometimes it switches to a semi-claymation style for no reason. Other times, it plays up the musical angle or focuses on a lovey-dovey subplot to such an extent that it's easy to forget that it's a horror. And just when it looks like things couldn't get more bizarre, a group of corpses perform an elaborate song and dance number. Truly, this is such a mad film. Number 6. John dies at the end. In a nutshell, this adaptation of David Wong's novel is an unstructured mess. However, that comment isn't necessarily a criticism. Considering the sci-fi detective noir comedy deals with transcendental drugs, manifestations of realities, projections of consciousness, ancient gods, and a zillion other things, it only has time to cover the bare bones of each concept. As such, there's no point trying to figure out what's going on, since the narrative repeatedly veers off in all sorts of discombobulating directions. One moment, David is fighting a zombie skinhead while pondering the paradox of Theseus' ship. The next, he's trying to run through a penis door to escape a sausage monster. And astonishingly, that's not the oddest part of this movie. This level of incoherence should be a major issue, but John Dies at the End gets away with it since it embraces its boundary-pushing absurdism. The main characters are well aware that this is all lunacy, so they don't try to understand what's going on. And for this reason, it's best not to analyse the deeper meanings of John Dies at the End, and instead, just go with the flow. Number 5. The Boxer's Omen. As soon as it begins, The Boxer's Omen comes across as a visceral sports drama. In the following scene, it turns into a mafia martial arts flick, and when a magical monk appears and asks our hero Chan to defeat an evil wizard, all within the first 5 minutes I might add, it's apparent that this is a tale that was meant to be enjoyed, not understood. Although a nonsensical narrative can be a deterrent, The Boxer's Omen is most enjoyable when it's pure gobbledygook. Within the first half hour, Chan vomits up a moray eel, a warlock eats brain juice from a fresh skull, and a bat skeleton regenerates after being doused in rat blood. Such imagery has little effect on the plot, but there's no question it's captivating as hell. Some special effects are amateur, but this simply adds to the film's wacky charm. It's tough not to laugh at the spiders and bats, considering they are blatantly wind-up toys. If the same plot was told in a traditional manner, this Hong Kong horror would be pretty forgettable. But due to the director's decision to make everything as outrageous as possible, The Boxer's Omen is a wonder to behold. Number 4. Cemetery Man. In this undead comedy, the town of Buffalora is hounded by zombies. To keep the problem in check, a disgruntled caretaker called Francesco is hired to eliminate the undead the instant they rise from the local graveyard. Despite kicking things off like a run-of-the-mill B-movie, Cemetery Man quickly becomes a genre-bending extravaganza. Rather than slowly transitioning from one genre to another slowly, it feels like the ensemble are routinely picked up and dumped in a different movie. With characters falling in love with decapitated heads, chatting with the Grim Reaper, or pretending to have penis removal surgery, it's difficult to know if Cemetery Man is a horror flick, a philosophical drama, a tongue-in-cheek comedy, a combo of the three, or something else entirely. The plot, if it can be called that, changes with such flippant regularity, it's fascinating to see how little resemblance the climax has to the initial premise. Even though it's pretty incomprehensible, Cemetery Man is a blast, due to the hilarious dialogue, stunning visual sequences, and solid performances. Number 3. Donnie Darko. 2001 was a towering cinematic year due to films like Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Spirited Away, and The Lord of the Rings. Despite competing against massive brands and studios, Richard Kelly made a colossal impression with his directorial debut, Donnie Darko. Not only was the psychedelic thriller one of the best movies of the year, it was also the weirdest by a long margin. While sleepwalking, the titular character encounters a person wearing a demonic bunny costume called Frank, who pinpoints the end of the world down to the second. Donnie begins researching time travel, hoping to find a way to avert Armageddon. Despite being discussed and dissected to death since its release, Donnie Darko still proves to be a real head-scratcher. The story deals with many complex concepts, including quantum mechanics, tangent universes, wormholes, and liquid spears jutting out of people's chests. Not only that, these scientific phenomena are barely explained, making it harder to grasp Donnie Darko's themes and overall message. Of course, the sci-fi masterpiece doesn't need to be understood to be enjoyed, however. Due to its haunting atmosphere, quotable dialogue, iconic soundtrack, and terrific performances, Richard Kelly's first film still stands the test of time. Number 2. Beau is Afraid. In this 3-hour tragicomedy, the titular character embarks on an oniric odyssey to reach his family home after hearing his mother has been decapitated by a chandelier. Simply put, Beau is Afraid feels less like a horror and more like a fever dream. Through no fault of his own, the poor protagonist encounters an unrealistic level of hostility everywhere he goes. Even though he's viciously stabbed by a naked serial killer early on, that's nothing compared to what awaits him. For the most part, the story plays out like it could almost take place in reality, but during the climax, Beau descends into a whole new realm of chaos and madness unlike anything else seen in the previous 2 acts. Beau is Afraid may be Asta's most polarizing movie to date, but it's also his most ambitious. Although many movies are referred to as one of a kind, Beau is Afraid truly does deserve that mantle. Number 1. Tetsuo the Iron Man. Though Tetsuo the Iron Man is classified as a sci-fi horror, this experimental piece defies categorization. In fact, it barely classifies as a film, since it feels more like a relentless experience of maddening energy and trippy imagery. In this cyberpunk feature, a businessman begins to sprout iron around his body, shortly after crashing into a metal-obsessed sadomasochist. Though things look like they couldn't get worse after he impales his girlfriend on his drill-like penis, he realizes his unique circumstance is merely the beginning of his problems. As WTF as the premise sounds, the way this Japanese thriller is directed is more stupefying. Tetsuo rarely goes more than 5 seconds without some Cronenberg-like visual or nightmarish violence, emphasized further by the high-speed cuts, unnerving sound effects, and deliberately janky editing. These elements are a real punch to the senses, creating a permanent state of uneasiness. Even if it was feasible to understand the story, which it isn't, there isn't a moment to process what's happening. Instead, Tetsuo the Iron Man moves from one tumultuous scenario to another until ultimately concluding in a glorious crescendo of chaos.